Good evening, sisters, comrades, and friends. I would like to congratulate the Red Sparks Union and all of those who have worked so hard to organize this evening and yesterday's evening. And as we can see, a room full of people listening, so it's a great success. Congratulations. And to all of us, tomorrow is International Working Women's Day. So I say already a very happy International Working Women's Day to all of us. I will start my talk with singing a refrain from one of my favorite songs. My voice isn't good, but I'll try to sing. This song was written during the time of Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s by the wives of British mine workers who were on strike at that time. It goes, "We are women, we are strong, we are fighting for our rights, side by side with our men who work the nation's mines. United in the struggle, united in the past, and it's here we go, the women of the working class." It's a nice song, isn't it? I don't know the rest of the words, but as it goes on, it talks about women's liberation and the struggle for women's rights. The reason I like this song is because to me, it encapsulates the women's struggle. We are women, we are strong, we are fighting for our rights. But we don't fight alone, side by side with our men, united in the struggle, united in the past. Our struggle for women's liberation cannot be taken out of the overall struggle for justice, equality, democracy, and liberation, a struggle we wage with our men comrades. Otherwise, neither they nor we can ever win victory. We have to struggle together, even as we women have to continue to struggle for gender equality. And it's here we go, the women of the working class. This is another way of saying, Makibaka, huwag matakot. That's the battle cry of Filipino women and activists, which means, struggle, do not be afraid. Today, as we celebrate International Working Women's Day, it is good to remember that 104 years ago, in 1910, during the Second International Conference of Socialist Women held in Copenhagen, Clara Zetkin, an outstanding German socialist and fighter for women's rights, proposed that an International Working Women's Day be held every year on March 8th. March 8th marked the day when hundreds of women workers in the United States demonstrated for the right to suffrage and to build a powerful garments union. The following year, on March 8, 1911, more than 1 million women and men in Europe attended International Women's Day. They were campaigning for women's rights to work, vote, to hold public office, equal pay for equal work, maternity and child benefits, and better working conditions, as well as for the general upliftment, emancipation, and empowerment of women. We owe our political consciousness to women as women today, in large part to the women who struggled for women's rights, and for the many, many, many other women who followed in their footsteps. We draw our inspiration and courage from these women as we face ever greater challenges today, as we wage our struggle for women's liberation. Today, our struggle for women's liberation is a struggle against imperialism, class oppression and exploitation, patriarchy, and gender inequality. The oppressive and exploitative policies of imperialism, especially US imperialism, intensifies gender inequality. Policy decisions by government and corporate monopoly capitalism and implementation of these policies by national governments are the huge barriers in our struggle for justice, equality, and democracy. These policies result in massive unemployment, union busting, cheap labor, demolition of homes of the urban poor, migration. In the Philippines, 1/10 of the population have left and are continuing to leave the Philippines to look for work outside the Philippines in order to find a better life for themselves. There is increased landlessness for the peasants and indigenous people, and greater economic burdens for the large majority of the population, especially affecting women. Huge cutbacks in government budgets on housing, health, education, and other social services have reduced access to health services and education. Women and children are especially affected by this. The neoliberal policies of privatization, deregulation, and liberalization have affected the lives of thousands upon thousands of women, men, and children. Let me give you an example of the effects of privatization as it affects women in the Philippines. The example is about the privatization of a government hospital. This is the Fabella Memorial Hospital. This hospital is the only government maternity hospital in the Philippines. It is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, government maternity hospital in the world. Privatizing this hospital means that the present hospital will be torn down and rebuilt within the compound of other hospitals. The maternity hospital will only be part of an overall hospital. It will no longer be a maternity hospital. Because it will be privatized, the cost of health services for women will be much more expensive, preventing the majority of women from availing of the prenatal care, birth in a hospital, and postnatal care. And by the way, the Philippine government now has a new name for privatization, and that is corporatization, because it's corporatized. Oops. Women in the Philippines are, of course, protesting this. They are demonstrating and demanding that the Fabella Memorial Hospital remain a government hospital. They bring out the effect privatization of the hospital will have on women. But so far, the plans to privatize continues, as the protests and demonstrations will also continue. Imperialism means wars. If we need any more proof of this, we just have to see the ongoing wars of aggression all over the world. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Israel occupation of Palestine, etc. The Philippines is important to the United States because of its strategic geographical position and because of its rich natural resources. To ensure that the U.S. interests in the Philippines are maintained, there is an increasing U.S. presence in the Philippines, quietly encouraged by the Philippine government. I say quietly because since 1991, the U.S. bases have been thrown out of the Philippines through a majority vote of the Philippine Senate because of a powerful anti-bases movement. But subsequent to that, treaties like the Visiting Forces Agreement now allow U.S. forces to come in to visit the Philippines permanently. And this is a treaty signed by the Philippine government and the U.S. Senate. The recent Typhoon Haiyan, you've heard of this typhoon, was a good reason for the U.S. troops to come in to do so-called relief work. More than 5,000 U.S. troops came in right after Haiyan. They went to the devastated areas of Haiyan and then quietly are no longer seen. While they were in Leyte and Samar, they made sure they went up even to the countrysides, also supposed to do relief work, but they were looking for something else. They were looking for where the guerrilla zones and the guerrilla bases of the New People's Army were, doing relief work. There is no real evidence that they have left, or if they have officially left, there are several of hundreds of them still there. This is what they do after joint military exercises with the Philippine military. They supposedly leave, but several hundreds of them stay on. There are several sightings of them in different places in the Philippines, but there is never an official recognition that they are there. President Aquino is now negotiating an increased rotational presence of U.S. troops, warships, and planes in the Philippines. Former U.S. bases in Subic and Clark Field are now being readied for this. Part of the preparation is the springing up again of entertainment and hospitality areas outside Subic and Clark. This means increased prostitution, sexually transmitted diseases, rape, and sexual assaults. Already, pimps have been going to the provinces affected by Typhoon Haiyan, and because of the severe economic crisis there, are recruiting girls even as young as 14 years and women to go into the hospitality industry in Subic and Clark. Increased U.S. presence will also mean increased human rights violations, especially against women. Again, this will not happen without protests, demonstrations, as well as educational campaigns, especially in areas that will be open to increased U.S. presence. If imperialism is today the biggest obstacle to women's liberation, it goes without saying that fighting and defeating imperialism is the way to women's liberation. When liberated from the oppressive and exploitative system and the building of a system that is non-exploitative and non-oppressive, the conditions are created for women to be equal to men, to improve themselves and to take part in the reconstruction of our country and our lives. As I said at the start of my talk, our struggle for women's liberation cannot be taken out of the overall struggle for justice, equality, democracy, and liberation, a struggle we wage with our men comrades. But we have to struggle with our men comrades together, but we also have to struggle for gender equality. The obstacles to women's liberation are rooted in the oppressive and exploitative system, which is profit-oriented, and where the wealth of the country is in the hands of a very few, while the rest of the population, men and women, bear the heaviest economic burdens. It is a class struggle. That is why we have to struggle together. When the oppressive economic, political, and cultural burdens have been lifted, there will be the liberation, and that the conditions for women to struggle and be equal will be there. Easier, but that doesn't mean we don't struggle now. We continue to struggle for equality, but then when the oppressive forces are lifted out, we can struggle to build a future that is really for our benefit. So what are our tasks of women in struggle? First, we ourselves must become aware of the political, economic, and cultural forces that oppress and exploit us as women. Let us study the events around us, analyze and understand them. Then let us awaken the political consciousness of other women, those in our family, our friends, our neighbors, our co-workers. Let us join movements, women's movements that are anti-imperialist. We have to help build a movement that will educate and arouse women and men on the rights of women, especially the struggle to overcome all forms of economic and political oppression and discrimination, and that will fight for women's rights. Let us join organizations that are active in working for social change. Don't expect the big change to come in a few days or years. In the Philippines, the revolutionary struggle has been going on for over 45 years. And as someone asked me today, actually, since the time of Bonifacio in 1896. So it's a long struggle, but we continue to struggle. Many of our early founders have gone on to their eternal rest. Through the years, thousands have suffered arrest and imprisonment, martyrdom. Many have disappeared and given up their lives. But the struggle continues. There are always new forces, younger blood, with the same kind of daring and commitment. They push the boundaries. They push the struggle forward. Let me conclude this talk with the story of Lorena Barros. Lorena was an anthropology student in the 1970s. She was a student activist. And as a student activist, she began to see the importance of politicalizing and mobilizing women to participate in the struggle. Together with other women activists, she founded Makibaka, our revolutionary women's organization. One of Makibaka's first activities was to picket a beauty contest. In 1973, Makibaka became one of the founding members of the National Democratic Front of the Philippines. It is still a very active organization in the Philippines today. I know because I am a Makibaka member. In 1972, when the dictator Marcos declared martial law, Lorena and other Makibaka members joined the revolutionary underground. Lorena joined the New People's Army. She was captured, escaped from prison, and rejoined the New People's Army. While Lorena was in prison, her husband, who was a commander in one of the units of the New People's Army, surrendered to the military. So when Lorena escaped from prison, she asked that she go back to the area that her husband had once led as a commander of the New People's Army. And she started out as an ordinary member, rose to the rank of commander. And in a battle one day, she was wounded, and she told her other comrades that she would cover for them so they could escape. So Lorena died in 1976. But Lorena did not die in vain. Today, there are hundreds of thousands of women who are politicalized, who are activists and revolutionaries, members of Makibaka and other revolutionary organizations. Many women have become members of the New People's Army, have become commanders like Lorena in the New People's Army. Lorena Barros' legacy lives on as the legacy of so many other women and men who have given up their lives fighting for the liberation of our country. So we too, we must continue the struggle for a just and truly democratic society against patriarchy and gender inequality and for the full liberation of women. I will conclude my talk in quoting the song I started out with, and it's Here We Go, Here We Go. Or, as in the Philippines we say, Makibaka, wag matakot! Struggle, do not be afraid. Thank you.